Excuse me. Excuse me. I got to be direct.
In the cultural fog of the late 90s, just after the last chords of grunge had faded, and before boy bands fully took over the airwaves, MTV, still known more for music videos than reality shows, quietly dropped something unexpected into its lineup. An animated series with no flash, no sparkle, and no tolerance for nonsense. Daria, which ran from 1997 to 2002, didn't shout to get attention. It didn't need to. Anchored by its deadpan protagonist, Daria Morgendorffer, the show carved out a space for smart, alienated teens and the secretly alienated adults who raised them, who had grown tired of watching cartoon characters scream at each other or chase popularity like it was a full-time job. Daria wasn't trying to be cool. In fact, she made apathy look like an art form. With her ever-present green jacket, combat boots, and an arched eyebrow that did more emotional lifting than most animated faces of the era, Daria represented the unglamorous, unbothered end of the teenage spectrum. She wasn't interested in fitting in, nor was she interested in standing out. She simply wanted to get through high school with as little human interaction as possible, and maybe with a decent GPA. Alongside her best friend, Jane Lane, a cynical, sarcastic art student with a knack for observational snark, Daria walked the halls of Lawndale High with a running internal monologue that doubled as cultural critique. The show began as a spin-off of Beavis and Butthead, where Daria first appeared as a rare oasis of intellect in a desert of idiocy. Recognizing her appeal, especially to the female audience they had largely ignored, MTV greenlit her own show. Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead, was busy with King of the Hill and wasn't involved, so the reins were passed to Glenn Eichler and Susie Lewis, who steered the tone in a more subtle, character-focused direction. What emerged was a show that mocked everything from consumerism to school assemblies without ever raising its voice. Daria was never mean-spirited, but it never flinched from skewering the ridiculousness of teenage life, suburban parenting, and societal expectations either. Set in the fictional town of Lawndale, a stand-in for every beige, middle-class American suburb, the series painted a vivid picture of dysfunctional normalcy. Daria's home life was a symphony of soft chaos. Her mother, Helen, a high-powered attorney, juggled conference calls with clumsy attempts at parenting. Her father, Jake, was forever on the verge of an emotional collapse, often triggered by nothing more than a slow internet connection or the memory of his own emotionally distant father. And then there was Quinn, Daria's younger sister, who proudly denied being related to her in public and lived her life as vice president of the Fashion Club, a four-person tribunal devoted to lip gloss and boy drama. Among them is Stacy, a nervous wreck, Tiffany, Lawndale's representative of the brainless, monotone Valley Girl, and Sandy, the club president, who is constantly suspicious of Quinn's attempts to undermine her, with every word leaving her lips dripping with caustic sarcasm, and usually begins with the phrase,
G-Queen, 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 G-Queen.
Daria, meanwhile, operated like a permanent visitor from another planet. She moved through this world with an anthropologist's eye and a sarcastic mouth, delivering one-liners with the perfect blend of intelligence and exhaustion. She didn't hide her disdain for surface-level interactions or the school's various cliques, from the airheaded cheerleaders to the oblivious jocks. But she also wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. She was complicated, guarded, and not always right. And that's what made her so real. The show never forced her into growth for growth's sake. When Daria learned lessons, they were small, often uncomfortable, and always earned. At Lawndale High, Daria found the one person who understood her sardonic worldview without needing it explained. Jane Lane, a fellow outsider with a paint-splattered wardrobe, an arched eyebrow, and a wit nearly as sharp as Daria's own. Jane, an unapologetically artistic soul from a household that thrived on chaos and creative neglect, offered Daria something close to emotional stability. Together, they became each other's anchor in a school system that seemed custom-built to drive thinking people mad. They weren't just observers. They were commentators, delivering dry, blistering critiques of Lawndale's cast of characters. The clueless football jocks, the cheerleaders with more pep than sense, the self-important teachers, and the bureaucrats who ran the school like it was a failing startup. Nothing was off-limits, not even themselves. Jane's older brother, Trent, added another layer of awkward fascination. As the aloof, chronically horizontal frontman of Mystic Spiral, he was the object of Daria's painfully obvious crush, one that rendered her unusually speechless and soft-voiced whenever he entered a room. That infatuation loomed quietly in the background for several seasons until it was complicated and then detonated by the arrival of Tom Sloan. Tom started off as Jane's boyfriend, but his late-night conversations with Daria began to drift towards something deeper, more intellectual, and more emotionally intimate. When he and Daria kissed, it didn't just shake Jane and Daria's friendship, it cracked the show's emotional foundation wide open. That fissure became the central drama of the first Daria movie, Is It Fall Yet? A story that traded sarcasm for sincerity, forcing all three characters to confront the complexity of love, betrayal, and forgiveness. It also signaled a shift in the show itself, which began to embrace vulnerability and interiority with even more care and nuance. Despite its animated format and 30-minute episodes, Daria was never just a cartoon. It was a mirror held up to adolescence, sometimes a warped, satirical one, but more often than not, a painfully accurate reflection of what it feels like to be a teenager who sees the world a little too clearly. Daria wasn't just a smart loner or a gloomy misfit. She was a mosaic of contradictions. She was intelligent but self-doubting, fiercely principled but surprisingly insecure, detached on the surface, but deeply craving authenticity and connection. While she regularly tore down the shallow culture around her, she also wrestled with her own contradictions. How much she envied her sister Quinn's effortless social confidence, how she wished her parents could understand her, and how she quietly hoped someone, anyone, might just get it. What made Daria revolutionary wasn't just the dry humor or the skewering of teen culture. It was the show's emotional honesty. In a landscape filled with loud characters doing loud things, Daria was subdued, perceptive, and brutally honest. Her intelligence was not a punchline or a gimmick. It was a lens through which she saw every hypocrisy and hollow promise society tried to sell. But it didn't make her life easier. It made it harder. She didn't wear her intellect like armor. It weighed on her. It distanced her from others, made her cautious in relationships, and left her feeling like the only person awake in a town stuck in a dream of mall culture, reality TV, and forced smiles. Yet despite her cynicism, Daria kept showing up. She didn't run from the world. She stood in it, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, but present. She made efforts, however reluctant, to grow. She took risks, from navigating a rocky friendship with Jane to stumbling through a complicated relationship with Tom. She allowed herself, in halting, often hilarious ways, to evolve. Her growth wasn't the kind that ends in a sweeping prom speech or a dramatic makeover. It was quieter. She learned to open up a little. She began to recognize her own blind spots. She softened toward her family, even as she rolled her eyes at them. And ultimately, she chose to step forward into adulthood, not because she believed it would be better, but because she knew stagnation wasn't an option. When she chose to attend Raft College in the series finale movie, Is It College Yet?, it didn't feel like a typical coming-of-age victory lap. There was no triumphant music swell, no tearful goodbye framed in golden hour light. It felt real. Daria didn't walk off into the sunset. She boarded a bus, probably sat by the window, pulled out a book, and sighed. She was still skeptical, still unsure if the world was worth the effort. But she was willing to try. And for a character who had built her entire persona around not trying, that was a radical act. From a production standpoint, Daria was unapologetically scrappy. Created with a relatively low budget, the show made no attempt to mask its limitations. The animation was intentionally minimalist, with characters often moving in a stiff, jerky fashion and maintaining frozen facial expressions during long stretches of dialogue, but this stripped-down visual style worked in its favor. The stillness of the characters only heightened the sharpness of the writing, reinforcing the show's signature deadpan tone. The static look underscored Daria's emotional detachment and the suffocating sameness of suburban life, both key themes of the series. It was less about visual flair and more about atmosphere, pacing, and delivery. The show also leaned heavily on music to anchor its mood. During its original run, episodes were laced with contemporary pop, rock, and alt radio tracks, everything from Garbage to No Doubt, adding emotional context to scenes or offering ironic counterpoints. Unfortunately, when the series was eventually released on DVD, most of those songs had to be stripped out due to licensing issues, leaving behind strange silences or generic stock music that sometimes disrupt the emotional rhythm. For longtime fans, these audio voids can feel like ghosts of a once vibrant soundscape. At the center of Daria was Tracy Grandstaff, whose voice performance defined the title character. She delivered Daria's monotone with just enough inflection to hint at the roiling inner life beneath the surface. Sarcasm tinged with sincerity, judgment laced with empathy, and frustration softened by flashes of self-awareness. Her performance managed to be emotionally restrained without ever feeling flat. She was supported by Wendy Hoops, who performed a small miracle by voicing three major characters: Jane, Quinn, and Helen, with such distinct vocal identities that most viewers had no idea it was the same person. Each voice carried specific energy. Jane's laconic cool, Quinn's breathy superficiality, Helen's clipped corporate urgency. The supporting cast added more flavor. Brittany's helium-brain cheerleader cadence, Kevin's dim jock bro vibes, Upchuck's predatory purr, and Ms. Lee's aggressive authoritarianism all left lasting impressions. Culturally, Daria became an accidental landmark. It didn't arrive with fanfare or a marketing blitz. It wasn't hyped as groundbreaking or edgy. It simply showed up, quiet, dry, and observant, on a network better known for voyeuristic reality TV and shock value stunts. And yet, it carved out a space for itself, largely because it spoke to a generation that was tired of noise. Daria offered a counter-narrative to the hyperactive optimism of teen soaps and the glammed-up rebellion of other MTV fare. It portrayed adolescence not as a whirlwind of romance and popularity, but as a slow-motion comedy of discomfort. Daria herself, with her sarcastic detachment and refusal to perform happiness, gave voice to kids, especially girls, who didn't fit the mold. Her refusal to fake enthusiasm or mold herself into something more palatable felt revolutionary. So what did Daria mean for me as a teen in the 1990s? Well, I was just shy of my 20th birthday when it first aired, but I watched it from the very first episode, and immediately I was hooked. I watched the whole series, and even today, I'll take a week or two to binge watch every episode, except a few outliers. What drew me to the show was its realism, a show that could juggle satire and sincerity with a balance that wasn't always perfect, but it was that imperfection that made it great. The jokes, though exaggerated in some instances, were fully relatable, be it in school, at home, or in wider society. The awkward wedding with relatives brought together who can't stand each other, airheaded cheerleaders and brainless jocks, and teachers who desire that their students answer their questions. But when a student does answer, they immediately become agitated that said student might be too smart or showing off. Now, I won't let rose-tinted glasses blur my vision too much. The show was by no means an unblemished gem. The musical episode from Season 3, while I appreciate that it was meant to be a parody of bombastic Broadway musicals, felt like a joke that overstayed its welcome. It might have worked for a 5-minute segment, where the show could have taken shots at itself in some self-deprecating gesture, but for an entire episode, it got real old, real fast for me, and I usually skip it when I'm rewatching the show. Another common complaint was the introduction of Tom and his effect on Daria and Jane's friendship. Honestly, when I first watched the arrival of Tom and his transition from Jane's boyfriend to Daria's boyfriend, it didn't bother me. Such things happen in real life, and the way they handled it was actually quite good in many aspects. The thing that always bothered me about Tom was the fact that he was always right. Every suggestion, every critique, every perspective was correct, and he always seemed kind of smug about it. I remember thinking at the time, no one can be so right every single time, without exception. I appreciate that. When compared to Jane and Daria, he's a little more well-adjusted and socially savvy, but he just didn't really have the personality to back it up. He always struck me as plain, not helped by the one-note delivery of his lines. I appreciate that voice acting is hard, but Tom's voice was just very bland, much like the rest of the character himself. He never got angry or frustrated, even when the whirlwind of Daria and Jane's relationship was spinning around him. The episode where Tom and Daria arrange to make love for the first time, and Daria loses her nerve and chickens out, I thought would drive a real wedge between them. But instead, he just shrugs it off like it's just another thing. I was really hoping this might give a new dimension to his character, but instead it's just a simple meh, and they move on. I don't want to say Tom was an awful character, let's not get silly, but he was just there, and I really couldn't see what Daria and Jane found truly appealing about him. Anyway, critiques aside, the real reason the show Daria appealed to me was because I saw so much of myself and my schoolyard experiences in Daria and Jane. I've always been a highly artistic person, and with that comes a desire to look at the world and see beyond the superficial, to understand why things are the way they are. Now, unlike Daria, I had a very good relationship with my parents. They taught me to think for myself, to be an individual with my own thoughts, feelings, and tastes, and that I should stick up for them as long as they were within reason. But it was in school that the parallels emerged. I was always the quiet artist when I wasn't with my small group of close friends, doodling in textbooks and all over my homework, much to the irritation of my teachers. The other students, wrapped up in the cliques and cliches that Daria both superbly illustrates and satirizes, saw me as kind of stuck up, far too important with my graphite and my sketchbook to have any time for them. The reality was different. I didn't despise my fellow classmates. Well, except for a few, especially stupid or arrogant ones. But truthfully, I didn't understand them. I didn't understand their fixation on small things, on gossiping, on nails and dresses, and football stars. When we discussed music, I wanted to pick apart arrangements and lyrical meanings. And with movies, I wanted to find the deeper themes of their plot lines, not simply what was awesome and totally extreme. Like Daria and Jane, I felt alienated and isolated to a point, but not completely. I'd say if I were to compare myself to the two of them, I was closer in personality to Jane, but lacked her cutting cynicism and observational humor. This is why I found a kindred spirit in my best friend, Erica. While I'd known Erica since we were 4, as we grew, both of us became artistic and deeply philosophical about the world around us, but she was an artist in words, and me an artist in pictures. She would write poetry about the world around her, trying to make sense of a messy realm of trends and fashion, while I would use drawing as a means of creating a personal ideal divorced from a skin-deep, threadbare world of teenagers and their fleeting interest in what was right in front of their very noses. When I describe it in words, it does sound rather pompous, but then again, wasn't that the case with Daria and Jane? Like them, Erica and I enjoyed trying to peek behind the curtain, to see behind the mask of what corporations attempted to appeal to with the to-the-max attitude that sought excessive fun and individual glory, but with no personality to back it up. The strange thing is, the superficiality and shallowness that Erica and I bemoaned and Daria satirized was barely a shadow of what we would be subjected to in years to come, once the internet and smartphones appeared. I think that's why Daria has stood the test of time. It may be quintessentially 90s, but the messages it seeks to impart remain as relevant, and indeed more relevant today. Its cultural footprint has only deepened, and what began as a spin-off from a loud, chaotic cartoon about 2 slack-jawed burnouts quickly matured into one of the most incisive and unexpectedly poignant shows on television. Critics routinely hailed it as one of the sharpest, most thoughtfully written series of its time, applauding its refusal to pander or preach. Unlike other teen-centric shows that leaned heavily on cliches or exaggerated drama, Daria carved out a space for the nuanced, the introverted, the disillusioned. It tackled themes like socioeconomic inequality, race, performative popularity, academic burnout, existential dread, and the often invisible weight of depression, always laced with wit, but never veering into cruelty or careless sarcasm. The humor was dry, the commentary biting, but the heart was always intact. Where most shows offered glossy, airbrushed versions of adolescence, Daria held up a cracked mirror, one that reflected the absurdity of pep rallies and career days with equal clarity. It showed that the teen years weren't just made of dramatic breakups and slow dance montages. They could be boring, frustrating, occasionally hilarious. More often than not, they were isolating. But within that alienation, Daria found a strange kind of solidarity. Even now, decades later, Daria Morgendorffer remains a symbol. Not a marketing-friendly icon or meme-fodder caricature, but something quieter and more lasting. She stood for the kids who didn't see themselves in the prom queens or the jocks or the laugh-tracked sitcom families. She was for the girls who found comfort in library corners and filled notebooks with observations instead of flirtations. She was for anyone who ever felt like they were faking their way through adolescence, waiting for everyone else to catch up or shut up. She wore sensible boots instead of strappy sandals, raised her eyebrows instead of her voice, and remained unmoved by every wave of high school drama unless it had a punchline. Books were her refuge. Trent was her exception. She loved with caution, observed with precision, and resisted the shallow currency of popularity in favor of something harder to define: self-possession. Maybe that was Daria's quiet revolution in an era and a world that constantly rewarded volume, flash, and conformity. She proved there was real power in staying grounded, thinking critically, and not laughing at jokes you didn't find funny. In the noise of adolescence, she was the static that reminded us to think twice. Her rebellion wasn't loud, but it was deeply resonant, a reminder that intelligence, authenticity, and silence could still shake the walls.
Hi, I'm Daria. Go to hell. It won't work. My face is too expressive.
Come along, let's sing where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 9 on X. we're here just for you.